Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs. This is Kate. Communication is just about the biggest bucket of skills out there. So when we talk about leaders needing great communication skills, it's really important that we dial in and get clear about which specific skill we mean in the moment. So today, we're talking about how leaders can effectively organize and deliver clear messages. My guest shared so much insight that this will actually be the first of 2 episodes devoted to this topic. So I'd like to invite you to have a seat and join the conversation. I'm really excited and fortunate to have Erin O'Meara with me today. She talks about strength and gentleness, what she refers to as velvet steel, both on LinkedIn and kind of out in the world. She's a regular columnist for the Harpswell Anchor, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with her about one of the big things, communication. So, Erin, what would you like to add about what you have going on right now?
Well, thank you for the introduction. I think the thing I want to add is that I really believe in the power and promise of journalism. I believe in the power and promise of quality journalism, and I think it's really important that people understand the difference and begin to hone their media literacy skills.
Agreed.
And I believe that words matter. And words matter not just in journalism, but they matter in our interpersonal relationships and they matter in our work. And so we should be aware of the words we use and we should use them to great effect. And we should enjoy it. I think words are delicious.
Yes.
And right. And there's a buffet. There's so many, and we should explore them and we should think about how one word works in one context, but not in another. And we should have some fun while we're making sure that, we're understood and that our message is clear and that people can also respond to us and have a really rich conversation, because that's really what connection is all about. And that's the whole point.
I just love that. Words are delicious, Erin. They are. There are few things as good. As we were talking in some of our preparatory time, I feel a little silly saying that we're just going to talk about quote unquote communication, because as many people who've worked with me over the years have heard me say, that is a really broad umbrella of skills. We could talk about written word. We could talk about recorded presentation. We could talk about public speaking. We could talk about print journalism, you name it. But in the context of leadership, the thing I believe is so important for leaders to, I'm going to be so careful picking my words today, to get, on lockdown is the skill of organizing and delivering clear messages. So that's where I'd like us to start. And I'm curious, from your perspective and experience, what are the foundational skills, knowledge, and ability that people need to be clear communicators?
Sure. So I agree with you. It is a giant topic. It could be overwhelming. And I don't think that people need to be overwhelmed to learn and to grow and to be better communicators. I think that there are ways to understand the message and apply it to how we talk and write and how we behave. So, and I'm thinking of this study. So there's a study, and actually I believe it was a pair of studies from the late 1960s that have been sort of smooshed together. And people probably see these numbers that they say 55% of communication is body language, 38% is voice and presentation, and only 7% are the actual words we speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we should get stuck on that. And when, if anybody Googles those numbers, the study's going to come up and there's a lot of nuance. But one of the things that comes out in that study, and I think something that's really important for everybody to take away, is that all of our communication has to align. Our spoken
Yes.
words, our tone of voice, and our body language have to be aligned around the message for the message to be credible. So, as an example, if a leader says to someone on their team, that was great work, but they aren't looking at them in the eye when they say it, the person on their team might not really think it was a compliment. If someone on the team says, yeah, I'll get that done tomorrow, but they're rolling their eyes while they do it, nobody's going to believe that they're getting that done tomorrow, right? That's when the value of the words disappears. But then the other thing to think about is that since communication is so rich and it's everything, it's how we show up, it is the tone of our voice, it's even how we're feeling that day, and it's the words, that when we're using a channel of communication where something's missing, we have to find ways to compensate. So when you email somebody, right, you're not there. Your great mood, it's not there. Your really supportive body language and tone of voice, it's not there. What is there? How they're feeling, right? So there's this blank screen with no emotion, nothing to support the message, and maybe they've had a really bad day.
Yeah.
So when they open up that message, they're opening it up with their feelings, not with yours. And so if we take those same two words, great work, many people, when they open an email that has two words and it says great work, they don't necessarily take that as a compliment. No. There's another study that says the majority of people actually think that is snarky.
Yeah. Well, it feels pro forma, doesn't it? Great work.
Does.
Now I need you to do this.
Yes. So, right. But if you were walking into someone's office or, meeting them in the hall at work and you wanted to say great work, those words would come out with enthusiasm. They would see an expression on your face. It's also sort of hard just to get two words out and run by somebody. So there'd probably be more to that interaction and they would understand what you meant. But, it just came in an email and you say great work and people think, really? So don't do a 2-word email. That's not what that channel's for. That channel is for more robust communication. That channel is for an explanation. And when you're writing the email, you really have to consider that you're not there in person when the recipient opens it.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to make up for those parts of communication that are missing.
Yeah. If I can be so bold as to provide a mental model when you were talking about body language, tone, words, I tend to default to head and heart. And then what is it we need to add to it? And I think it's head, heart, and hands. That the head is our language, right? That's we're making word choices through our thoughts. The heart is the meaning, what I intend by it. And then our hands, that's that physical presence, the manner. It could also be the channel then too. So if I want 100% of the message to go and I only have my head present, I only have the words, I've got to somehow make up for, I've got to rebalance and redistribute the kind of effort that goes in. And as you've pointed out, we know that word choice, as much as it takes that energy for us to prepare and contribute that portion to any message, it's not as important. So you kind of have to prorate the different parts of it and put more, make those words more, effusive. You don't have to be flowery, you don't have to be fake, but instead of saying great work, it may have to be, Erin, I really want you to know how much I appreciate the great work you did on this project. Thanks so much.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I love the head, heart, and hands image. And I think that's really an important image because you do need to put your whole self into these things,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't mean you give yourself up. Communication doesn't take you over. It means you
No.
really consider these parts and how people receive
Mm-hmm.
information.
Well,
And so, yeah, absolutely. So you make the message a little more clear. You say, yeah, I really appreciate that project or that work on that project, or that project makes a big difference for us. Great work.
yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about brevity because, if we talk about, well, I'm emailing somebody as opposed to seeing them in person, I need to put more into it. You don't need to sacrifice brevity. Again, both of
No?
the examples we've given are just a few more words. But my most delicious word is laconic. That idea that it's, kind of short to the point, and carries a certain, wit or intelligence with it. So I want to make certain in this part of our discussion that I'm still an advocate for brevity and laconic writing and communication, but
Yeah.
it's about what is your intention and are you being deliberate and thoughtful?
Yes. And brevity is important. And wit, if it's authentic to you,
Yeah.
is really terrific, to help a message be understood. And oh, this brings me in so many directions, and I'm not sure where to go. It's very exciting.
Yay.
Um, yeah, so let's talk about brevity for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Jargon is terrible.
Yes.
Euphemisms are terrible. And by the way, as I say this, I know that they're terrible because I've been guilty of using them. I've heard it all come out of my mouth and then thought, oh goodness,
Mm-hmm.
Eric, what are you doing? Things like going after the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
How about let's do the easy things? How
Yeah.
about, right, we don't have to speak that way. And every business has jargon that is very specific to them.
I was just
And
thinking that every, industry, every company will have its own language, right? Or
yes,
accent or regional isms. And to your point,
yeah, and it's not, I don't think it moves a conversation along. And I do think that then people and companies have a very fine line to walk, right? Because there is
mm-hmm,
a company culture that says, well, we use this jargon, we have these acronyms and this is our shorthand, and using it shows that you're
mm-hmm,
with us. But think of the opposite of that, because using all of that also shows some people that they are out.
yes,
And so I think we really have to think carefully about the jargon we use and the clarity we're using in our conversation. And I think we take jargon out when we can.
I agree with you. Um, what I'm thinking about when I first started working in a hospital setting, it was a cardiac care facility, and actually, I think it was my boss, kept talking about, well, the number of cabbages that we're doing. And, I had come from retail, and all I could think about was Cabbage Patch Kids. Every time I heard cabbage, I thought of Cabbage Patch Kids. And finally, I screwed my courage to the sticking place and said, what does that stand for? Coronary artery bypass graft. And I think part of, if you're going to have jargon, if you're going to have industry appropriate shorthand, there also has to be safety for people to say, I don't know what that means.
Yes, yes, that's so important. And I think, to your point, one of the things that comes up when jargon is so freely thrown around is that people really don't feel like they should ask.
Yeah.
That you should just sort of step in knowing,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's any word choice. Are we assuming that people share meaning?
Hugely important point. And maybe we could talk a little bit about how tricky words are, um, and how we use them. I think of, so anybody who's learned English as a second language and they've had to grapple with the moment where they understand that pretty is a compliment. It means beautiful, but it's also an amplifier for things that are just not pretty. You can be pretty gross.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say you, something.
I'm having that type of day, so that's appropriate.
Something can be pretty gross, and how they have to scratch their head over that. There are a lot of things in the English language that are like that, but even words that maybe aren't confusing but will have a very different meaning. And so one of the tests I like to use, or the thought exercises I like to use, is to ask people what their definition of a great night is. So right, every Friday, everybody leaves work and people say, have a great night or have a great weekend. Or, 5 days a week, people leave work and everybody says, have a great night. And there's probably somebody going home that a great night is that they're going to play games with their kids. And somebody else is going home and they're only stopping home to change into their party clothes because they're going to be out all night. And somebody else is, struggling with, something that we don't know about. And a great night to them is making it through morning. I mean, the gamut of what a great night can be, it's infinite. And you don't need to understand what somebody's definition of a great night is to wish them a great night. Everybody understands that you're wishing them well. You do need to understand that everybody will have a different definition to that, to understand that there is complexity and context in all of our communication. And then I would also add that on, in terms of inclusion and creating safety in a workplace, knowing your teams well enough to have the idea of what their great night is can go a long way. And it's worth exploring, and it's worth knowing people on that level. Just for this exercise, it's worth understanding that what is a great night to you is not a great night to someone that you're speaking to.
That's exactly
And so something that is so simple on the surface is actually really complex.
So 2 questions for you. The first, what is your definition of a great night, Erin? I'm curious, and I'll hate myself if I don't ask.
I think it depends on the night, but a great night for me is with people I love, with lots of laughter and discussion, and those sorts of conversations that have a life of their own, and everybody is participating, and then you don't even realize that 3 hours have gone by. A great night for me, I think, is when everybody wants to overstay their welcome.
Yes, I love that. Okay, my next question, which is more on topic and not my rampant curiosity. So you've got this wonderful exercise that could in of itself be a way to start understanding this is what it means for people. These are the different contextual, keys, and understanding those different definitions and perspectives. That's one way. Are there other methods that you think leaders should employ to start to get to that place where they know their people well enough to know when I say great work, the person doesn't take it as snarky, or I understand that I need to say you did a wonderful job instead of great work. Am I making sense?
Yeah, so I think there are layers to what you're asking. And how do I want to start? I think I want to caution everybody that you never know how someone is showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say never just do the 2-word compliment, because it's easy enough to be specific, you know? And so maybe your star employee and someone that you've worked with for a long time and someone who really gives you the benefit of the doubt generally comes in and reads your note, and they don't have that source of generosity that morning, and they read it wrong. And so I think we always have to consider that. And then I would say on the flip side, when we're reading a note and we have that moment that everybody's had, right? You read something and you feel something flaring inside, and you're upset. That you pause. And a great thing for everybody to do, no matter what, is to write their email and always set it aside, always, and go back and read it and make sure that you're happy with what it says and how you're coming off and how you're delivering your message. I would also ask people that when they open up that email and they have that moment of being offended, that they also take a pause and they think, what other intent could I apply to this message?
Mm-hmm.
Was this message intended to be offensive? Was this message intended to be a reprimand or whatever negative feeling it's bringing up for you? Was it intended to conjure that feeling in me? Mm-hmm. And give the writer the benefit of the doubt, and give that pause, give both of you that grace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be enormously helpful in communication. And by the way, it doesn't mean that the note wasn't intended to spark bad feelings. Yeah. I'm not saying that people don't do that.
And isn't it easier on me if I choose not to take it that way and not end up on that particular cul-de-sac of bad feeling?
Yeah, that you get to keep yourself out of that loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that you give yourself grace. And some of this is even, so this starts to tip into conflict resolution, which is another topic that I love, and it is rich with word choice and all the choices that we make. But you can decide which battles you're fighting. So, right, you take that pause and you give the sender the benefit of the doubt. And maybe when you do that, when you think of what their other motives might have been, you'll come to a place you're comfortable with where you say, well, when they said great work, they actually meant it. You know, I spoke to them yesterday. This is a great project. That this is a compliment. And then you can rest easy.
What we're talking about at its core is relationships. The effectiveness of communication is entirely dependent upon the relationship between the speaker and the listener. And so what level of trust exists in that relationship so that I can easily know that Erin doesn't intend me harm when she says great work. And you know, hey, Kate is trustworthy and competent. She's not going to take offense to what I intend as great feedback. It's that relationship that matters.
It is that relationship. And I mean, let's delve into conflict resolution for a minute.
Yes, please.
So I agree. Communication is about relationship, and the best communication is when the sender and receiver have trust.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when communication is important, and this happens in a work environment all the time, where there might not be trust. You know, you might be coworkers, but you don't get along, or
we've probably all had that.
All have that, right? Somebody has a grudge. Somebody doesn't feel good about this relationship. You still have to work together. And so there's this concept in conflict resolution, and it's called fogging. And so what it says is that in any message, so a message comes my way and I find the delivery offensive. I'm sensing anger, or it's unfair, or it's making me defensive. And now I have a choice. So I can escalate the conflict. I can respond to the emotion I'm picking up in the message. And that's probably going to escalate the conflict and not going to help anybody. Or I can focus on the thing in the message, in the words, that's true. And I can respond directly to that. So a colleague comes to you and they're with a head full of steam and they say, Kate, the project is late and that's just not acceptable. And so what's the true part? The project's late. How do I respond to that? I can say, you're right. The project's late. And I understand that that's frustrating. And then you'll watch the anger drain, because it's hard to be angry at somebody who's agreeing with you. And what you just did, right? You're focusing on the part that's true and you're ignoring the part of the delivery that you find unacceptable. So that doesn't mean the behavior was acceptable, doesn't mean the delivery was okay. It just means there's a part of that message that was true. And so that's the part you key on. And then if we could just, and then I want to dig into that because it's super effective. I hate the name fogging. Well,
Yeah,
we're
I'm
talking
curious where that comes from.
I don't know the history of that. But to me, right, it suggests smoke and mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think there's magic in it. There's certainly magic in being able to handle a moment like that so that the anger's gone and the conversation can be constructive. And that you didn't escalate something and you didn't take part in turning a conversation into a bigger conflict or bigger deal than what anybody wants. I mean, that's magic.
It is.
But it's not smoke and mirrors. It's about connection. So what you're doing in that moment is you're listening and you're saying, I'm hearing this person. I'm hearing their worry or their concern. So you don't have to like the person. You don't have to agree with the delivery, but you're focusing in on the thing that's real and the thing that you understand to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is really powerful. And then when we take that deeper and we talk more about relationships, there's a lesson here. When have you ever offered comfort to somebody and it kind of lands with a thud?
Of course. I'm
You
the
sort
queen
of
of awkward.
Everybody is, right? I mean, you sort of think like you'll say something like, oh, that's hard. That sounds hard. The thing is that we all have really big emotions. And so when you're looking for the part that's true, right? The truth is someone might be overwhelmed, they might be suffering, whatever they're going through. It's a big deal, right? You can't say, oh, that's hard, and expect them to say, oh, I feel so heard.
Yeah.
You come at them with big feeling words. Like, that's overwhelming. That's devastating. You have a lot on your shoulders. You want to match the feeling in the moment. So that same idea of when we communicate that sort of all of our parts of communication have to be aligned. Well, for people to understand our messages, we need to meet them where they are. And so when someone's having a big feeling word, use a big feeling, and that doesn't mean that you have to understand their turmoil.
So, Erin, it sounds to me like you're also telling us that we have to be self-aware and aware of others before we open our mouths or set pen to paper.
Yeah, I guess so. And yes,
Yeah.
and it's not easy. It's
No.
not easy. And I'm here talking and telling people these things they should do. Well, I mess it up all the time. I will also say it's also okay to circle back and say I did that wrong.
Yeah. Well, what we're getting at in that, am I paying attention? This is a big feeling, so I need a big word for it. Am Am I aware that my meaning may not align? Am I matching my energy and my language? We're talking about emotional intelligence and how it is ultimately fundamental to any type of effective communication. And to your point, humans mess that up all the time.
Yes.
And leaders have the opportunity to do it and mess it up more than the average bear. So, that part of effective communication is circling back when it doesn't work and starting over.
Absolutely. And part of effective communication is also taking a pause when you know it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah. As opposed to, well, I've told you once, so I'm going to keep telling you the very same thing 5 times.
Yes.
I had a call not that long ago with a leader. He's like, well, we've been telling them the same thing for 5 years. And the thing I didn't say because I didn't want to come across as snarky was, what have you been doing wrong for 5 years?
Yeah.
It's not the team in that case. It's you've got to fix your message or your approach or expectations or the relationship or fill in the blank. And that's awareness.
Yes. When something's going wrong, you have to address it.
Mm-hmm.
So part of that is feedback. And
Yeah.
and feedback can come in a variety of forms. So the recipient of your message can come to you and say, I don't understand what you're saying. I wish that happened. That's not the thing that happens most often. Most often, you figure out that your message wasn't received because the result you expected isn't what you get. So, how come? And it isn't all, it's not always the listener. And I think, we like to think that our communication's really effective and, so it must be them. Well, no, sometimes it's really just us. And then sometimes the communication was clear, but maybe the goal isn't. Maybe sometimes the communication and the goal aren't aligned. Maybe sometimes
Mm-hmm.
the communication is not clear. I mean, there are a lot of things that can go wrong between a message leaving my heart, my head, my hands,
Yeah,
and reaching somebody else.
that's exactly right. And you talked about context before. In my past life, when we had a significant organizational change coming, one of the like quick trainings, if you will, and it was more like we're gonna do a sheep dip for leaders so that they're thinking about important things. It was on the impact of trust when there was a big scary change. That normally when everything's going great, it's yeah, I think you know what you're talking about. When it's big bad news, like we're going to have staff cuts or we're making a change that everybody perceives as negative, people can't hear because they're in amygdala hijack and all they
Yeah.
care about is, do you care for me? And that
Yeah.
perception. So again, it could be a beautifully crafted, perfectly on point, no ambiguity whatsoever message. And the context could impact the person's ability to hear it. And you have to adapt for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's really important when people are in, you know, flight or fight, they're not listening for nuance. They don't care that your prose is perfect. That the marketing savvy in your message should be applauded, right? Nobody's thinking that.
Yeah.
And they're having trouble hearing. And I think that's a really good point because there's no communication without a full loop. And I think people should really think about that, especially business leaders when they're organizing their departments and their structure. Communication is one way out from you, and it is only successful when it comes back to you.
Yeah.
in whatever form it comes back, right? So that the project is done as you thought it should be done. The person repeats back to you, yes, I completely understand it. I'm doing it. However that's going to work. It has to be a full loop. So leaders also have to decide, how many people can I have that full loop with? So how many direct reports can I have? I think that it gets very messy and muddy if you have more than 5, because then what you're saying is, I can manage 10 lines of communication. I can manage that line out and I can manage that line back. I think it gets very difficult. But, and I'm a little off track, but part
No,
of
no,
what you're
I
talking
I
about,
like
right,
what
is
I like where you are. We're on the track together.
we're on the track, we're in with the train's going in the right direction. So you need to know that people are listening to you. And when you're doing a company-wide communication, there are always going to be people who aren't on board.
Mhm.
There are going to be people who can't hear. You have to think about then, how am I priming everybody for this communication? Who are your directors and managers? Who are the people who are going to work directly with your teams most affected, with your teams who are hurting the most or feeling the most fear, or feeling any fear, quite frankly? I shouldn't even be qualifying the amount. Who are the people who are going to be there and going to be able to listen, understand the concerns, and speak back in a way that people can hear?
Mhm.
And so that requires time and training with your teams. Those frontline directors and managers, they need to understand the message. They have to have had time to take it in themselves,
Mhm.
because they might also feel concern, worry, fear. Change, even positive change,
Right.
creates anxiety.
It does. So I'm curious, so that full loop, I love that statement that there is no communication without a full loop. What are some approaches to creating the loop that you've seen work?
Yeah, so I think it's helpful if the person on the receiving end of the message can paraphrase it back.
Okay.
So sometimes that's the speaker asking, I just want to make sure this is clear, let me know. Sometimes that's training. You don't want to appear condescending, and it really isn't. But again, people have different lenses and there's different context. So if you think that there are details in your message that are confusing or could be lost, if you think that maybe you didn't take the time that you should have taken to craft it, ask people what they understand.
Yeah.
So I think that helps. I think spending time with your teams helps. You can learn how people best communicate, how they hear, how they understand. Because the fact is, everybody learns differently. And everybody takes in information differently and at different rates. And that's all okay as long as they understand it in the end. So make sure. I mean, I've
Mhm.
worked with teams, someone on my team who, she's really a visual learner. And so I could send an email with my beautiful prose and my great instructions, and it wasn't going to be great for her. But if I sat down with her with just my notepad and a pen and drew it, she would say, got it. She would rip that sheet out of my pad and be off and running.
Mhm.
And I'm not an artist, so I wasn't drawing anything that was beautiful. It just helped her organize the
Mhm.
mission.
Yeah. Well, I think some notes I made, because I am not, um, I do not learn through listening solely. I have a very hard time, like if people spew numbers at me, it just in one ear out the other. I have to see it. So if the content, if it's appropriate for it, provide handouts, or to your point, infographics and illustrations. It just goes back, do you know your audience well enough? Do you know your people and what they need?
Yes. Yeah. And some people learn by doing.
Yeah.
So, you know what? Let those people do, but ask them to come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We don't want anybody sort of feeling like they're just left twisting in the wind.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody needs that. Have them come back. Say, don't finish this whole thing. Let me know how you're doing.
Yeah.
And then pay attention, because there are a lot of cues we get from people. I think we can all see when a light comes on in someone's eyes. And that is a fabulous moment. That says that the communication is clear, right? My head, my heart, my hands are aligned. There's our two. They got it. There's a spark. They're excited. That's thrilling.
Mm-hmm.
You can also see when someone doesn't quite have that spark. So it goes back to what you were mentioning earlier. How do you have the safety to ask a question? Some of that, again, is knowing your teams and letting them know you, and make sure that the questions can be asked.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of skipping from conflict resolution into change leadership in some ways here too, that sometimes that light comes on and it's not a happy yellow light, right? People hear it and understand it and they don't like it. Angry orange, red, black, whatever your color for not good is. You also need to, and this may sound counterintuitive, I firmly believe when people understand and don't like it, you need to still embrace that.
Yes.
Because we're talking, what I'm talking about is resistance to change. And resistance is good news because it means people understand. I'm asking you to do different, be different, or there's something around you changing. Now you have to set boundaries around it, and people need to be appropriate and professional in the workplace about how they resist. But instead of being like, well, I didn't get the happy light, I got the bad light, it's, oh, good, I got a light, I can work with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got that light. So you've gotten a caution light, or you got a full-on stop.
Yeah.
And then you do need to circle back. You, the leader, you, the catalyst for change, needs something to happen. You've got people who understand it, and you have resistance. So here are your options. Well, I can ignore that and just hope they get on board. Well, that never works.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can address it, but you can address it with respect and care. And this goes back to creating that connection. What is your relationship? And you can be frustrated with the people who are giving you the red light. Maybe there are people who give you a red light every day on simple things, and it's annoying, right? You can be annoyed at the people who give you the red light. You can also still respect them, and you can find that place of connection. So you don't have to agree with them. And we are all adults, and we are adults living in a complicated world. And we are people that understand that there can be more than one thing that's true. And there can be more than one true thing that are in opposition to each other.
Yeah.
And you can stand in that moment, and leaders have to embrace that, because they're confronted with that paradigm all the time. So it can be true that this change needs to happen. It can also be true that the people giving you the red light have a real concern about that change.
Yeah.
It can be true that your directive needs to be followed out, that it's an imperative for whatever reason. And it can be true that the people who are giving you that red light are passionate about their work, are hard workers, are high contributors, are talented in their area of expertise, that they care for the result. And when you come to them with that, you are a valued member of this team. I am always impressed with your passion, your talent for coding, for numbers, for, whatever your area of expertise is impressive, and it is important to me, and it's important to this team. And we have to get this thing done.
I'm thinking this is a good point to bring in another subject that you wanted to make certain that we didn't lose sight of. So you've got your star employee who doesn't like the message, and then you've got your opposite of star employee who doesn't like the message. Are you treating them the same? Where does bias come in? And there's bias in that, well, you're a great performer, so I'm going to be okay with you saying you don't like it. You're the person that annoys me the most, so I'm going to tell you just to get in line. That's that kind of easy bias to think about in those settings. But bias plays a role in all of our communication. And it's another place where we have to be aware and mindful. And I know it's something that you're pretty passionate about, so I just want to make certain that we bring that in to our discussion.
Yeah. So thank you. Bias in the workplace is damaging.
Mm-hmm.
It is rampant. And it needs to be confronted. Everybody, when they're a leader, needs to really understand where their bias lies and needs to actively work on it. In the example, so the people giving you the red light, I think the leader then has to really interrogate themselves before they have any conversation. Why does this annoy me? Why is this a problem? Is the red light reasonable? What am I missing? And it's also okay to sit down with those employees and ask them, what am I missing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where does this resistance come from? So you acknowledge the thing that's true. You're incredibly talented. You're important, and I need to get this done. Well, let's talk about what I'm missing. What am I missing? And I think part of the key to this, and part of the key that keeps bias in check, is that everybody is treated equally. There is no person with the red light who gets a pass. The conversation, a productive conversation, happens with everybody. And then you also have to be really prepared to listen. And this is where the communication loop is so important, because, as the leader, you can't go into the situation and again say, well, my conversation, it's just one line, right? I'm telling you. Because you need to hear the feedback. And approaching some of these things with some humility, that you are talking to subject matter experts.
Definitely.
They have feedback. What is it? How do I open my mind so I can hear it? It might be important. Maybe the goal is good, but the path should be tweaked. Maybe they've got something to say.
Yeah.
And we should really be open to hearing it.
May I move us backward in time about a minute and ask about a word choice that you made? You talked about equal treatment in that communication loop. And I'm curious if we if it's really equal or equitable
You're
treatment.
right. That's a really good point. It's equitable.
Yeah. Like I'm thinking if, if one employee is really upset, but they're the person most impacted by the change. And then Joe over here is the same level of upset, but it actually doesn't have any impact on his day to day. Do they really get equal? You talked about a respectful conversation. Well, yes, they both get a respectful conversation, but I may be spending more time with Jane, our first employee, rather than Joe.
Yes, and that's a really good point. I think the equal is in
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give everybody should have the same opportunity to speak.
Yes.
Everybody who's giving me the red
Yeah.
light needs the same opportunity to speak, and they need to be approached with respect, some humility,
Mm-hmm.
and that communication loop has to be complete.
Yeah.
They're going to say something back to me. I really need to hear it.
Thank you.
That's really important. Yeah. And then you're right, because there is the part where we need to be equitable. And that's where a lot of EQ comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And paying attention to the signals people are giving you, because there are going to be people who are more directly affected, who feel more pain and a personal sense of loss over change. And there might be people who aren't so close, but have have a have a grievance. It's
Yeah.
different.
Strong opinions, past experiences,
Yeah.
fill in the blank. Well, it's one of the things I'm seeing develop as you're kind of instructing me, Erin, and just how I sort of take this. Like I have this one-on-one lecture with an expert. Is that it's so easy to fall into thinking that as a leader, effective communication is me talking, or delivering a message, being the sender. And you've explicitly talked about the importance of listening, but then you're also talking about emotional intelligence and that paying attention. And it's so important, even though it's obvious. I think it's so important for leaders to hear a large part of your job in effective communication is keeping your mouth shut.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness, yes. And listening is a hard skill. It requires all of our attention, and it does require feedback, right? So information comes in, it's going to go through all of my filters of understanding and experience.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm going to turn that information into the thing that makes sense to me. And then I have to decide if that was the original message.
Yeah.
So
And
then go ahead, sorry.
that's the ideal case too, where I'm not distracted. I'm not thinking about, what we're making for dinner tonight or my last meeting or the thing I have coming up next. I mean, what you described is the perfect no interference version of it as well.
Yes. And you have to not do the thing all of us do if you're in a moment of conflict or higher stakes, which this
Mm-hmm.
our conversation about, change and getting the red light, that's what that is. You have to not be planning your rebuttal while someone is still talking.
Yeah.
And we all do that. Everybody does that. You really have to have that presence to say, I'm going to fully listen to this.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you think 4 words in that exactly what you want to say, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And and wait and respond. And now I'm going to take us back 2 minutes ago. What you did, I said equal, and you filtered this and thought, well, we're talking about bias and we're talking about clarity. And so shouldn't that be about equity? And you took all the information in, you filtered it, you asked. I was able to listen to you and say, okay, great point. That's an important word.
Yeah.
And so we had a complete communication loop.
Yeah. Yes, we did. Thank you. Yeah. Well, and it's again, you're delivering. the information that you have with energy and humility at the same time. So even though I am, as I've shared, intimidated by you, it's also safe for me to say, hey, can I check on a word choice? Because I want to make certain I'm clear and that we're being as precise as we can be.
Yes, well, and I'm glad this space feels safe. And as I already, it's a space of mutual intimidation because you're so impressive and you're doing such an extraordinary job.
Here, let's reframe that for ourselves, Erin. Mutual respect and admiration.
There we go. That's much better. A much better word choice off of the buffet.
So this is where we'll press pause. Join me next time for part 2 of our conversation with Erin about communication. We're going to dive deeper into questions of bias and brevity, and Erin will review a list of recommended resources. Thank you for joining me in the comfy chairs. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD. Until next time.